ask everyone to either mute, or I'll go ahead and do that right now unless you're a presenter. And then if you have something to say, you can unmute and then remute yourself, okay?
Yeah. And I have started the recording now. And I'm also going to put this back up again. Okay. So I think we're going to start. I think some people will probably be joining us, and that's fine. We'll just go along as we go along. So I am starting with some initial comments about this, and Chris will be presenting about the buildings part of the plan, and then Karen Mesmer will be sharing about the transportation part, and then Carrie Ziegler will be talking about the electric vehicles part of this, and then I will be finishing out with some comments about trees, agriculture, and what are called cross-cutting measures. So, why is this not? There we go. Okay. So, what is the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan? Our three cities, Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater, and our county, Thurston, have committed to creating a plan that will reduce greenhouse gases by 45% by 2030 and by 85% by 2050. This is hard, and this is what the scientists tell us is necessary if we are to avoid 1.5 Celsius degree temperature rise, which is considered catastrophic to the planet. So it's courageous for us to follow the science on this. Who is making the plan? So just in terms of the structure of what's going on in order to create this plan, there is a steering committee, which is made up of 2 elected officials from each of the 4 jurisdictions and some staff alternates. There is also an advisory committee, which has been divided into 5 focus groups with local topic experts invited and serving. So there's a building and energies topic group, which Chris actually serves on. There's a transportation and land use one. There's an agriculture and trees one. There's a water and waste one. And then there's a cross-cutting one. Now, cross-cutting is sort of everything else, but especially measures that might need to happen across a number of these sectors in order for the plan to work well. This whole thing, after the jurisdictions came together and decided they wanted to do it, was housed under the Thurston Regional Planning Commission. And the staff person there, Allison Osterberg, is staffing this. And then the steering committee took proposals for a consultant to be hired, and they hired Cascadia Consulting, and so they are the consultants that are helping put this plan together. So I know there's people on this call who understand this very well, and then there are some of you who this is your first introduction to TCAT. So I just wanted to clarify who TCAT is and what our relationship is to this process. So TCAT is a climate action group that exists in Thurston County, and we play a coordinating role with other climate groups in the city. So we have a coordinating council, and the other groups meet with us. And then we have activities that we do on our own. And our primary focus is on getting a climate mitigation plan passed for our county. And so TCAT played a critical role in getting the jurisdictions to decide to do this in the first place. We have also provided input and feedback and pressure at times to them that has influenced the process as it goes along. But when we get to asking questions and discussion at the end of this, you know, if you feel like, well, why is that in the plan, or why isn't that in the plan? This is not a plan we created. You know, we have some of those questions too. But the plan is very much in process, and which I will be going over a little bit more in a moment. And so really what we're doing tonight is we're bringing you up to date on what has already been done on the plan. So to go over a little bit of what the process and the time frame of that has been, in January through May 2019, the committees, the steering committee and the advisory committee were formed, and they put out the bid for the consultant. May through September of last year, the Thurston Regional Planning Council and the consultant gathered ideas from everyone involved. So from the advisory committee members, ideas the consultant had, ideas from the general public, all of those were compiled into a great big list of about 300 ideas. And then from October through December, the consultant was evaluating the list of ideas. The consultant also created a ranking system or a scoring system for the ideas that were on the list. And he created that with input from the two committees. And then the advisory committee scored the items. You can see listed here at the bottom what some of the criteria were for scoring it. So one way of scoring it had to do with greenhouse gas, that should be a G, reduction potential. And then another had to do with the speed of deployment. How fast could we implement the ideas? A third had to do with control, which has to do with how much direct control do the jurisdictions have over this. And that was to make sure that we didn't adopt things that we in fact could not have agency over. And then they came up with a category called co-benefits. And some of this was at TCAT's influence. There were things that we were concerned had been left out. And so we added, we made input, and that resulted in them creating this co-benefits category. So that has ecosystem health in it, equity, economic benefits, and then adaptation. How well will it help us adapt to climate change? I forgot to say before I started, we're going to kind of take questions at the end of different sections. So when I get through this section, I'll take some questions, and then we'll go to Chris, and Chris will also wait till the end of his section to take questions. And I think some of the other presenters may take questions as they go along. So in January of this year, the committees reviewed the results of the ranking and decided to adjust the way it was weighing things. Various lists were created of 50 items that varied slightly. The February and March meetings wound up having to be canceled due to the virus, so that has put the process behind by about a month. On April 23rd, the steering committee reviewed what was being called options A and B and got some community input. And the consultant shared with everyone that he felt option B would not get us far enough. The steering committee wound up passing option B and asking him to add things from A or from the rest of the list in order to get us to the goal. And they were very clear that the important thing is that the plan meet our goals that we passed. So what's coming still in the process is in May, a draft will be reviewed by both committees. And then by mid-June, a draft will be released for public hearings, which will have to be done on Zoom. So you may wonder as you hear that, well, then what are we looking at tonight? So over the last several months, all of the options that they've looked at have included many of the same, there's about 80% of the things are the same in all of the options they've looked at. And then there's a few things that kind of depending on which option you look at are in or out. So what we're basically sharing with you tonight is stuff that is likely to be in there. So to start to get you familiarized with the plan and kind of what's happening with this whole process. So sometime in the late summer, the draft will be passed by the Thurston Mitigation Planning Committee, and then it will go to the 4 jurisdictions for adoption. Once adopted, the jurisdictions will have to decide how to implement and fund it. They are currently facing significant income shortfalls due to the pandemic. So one of the things that TCAT feels that we need to do is just really keep front and center in their attention that the public wants a climate mitigation plan, that the pandemic is not a reason for us to stop looking for a plan. It's in fact, in many regards, a reason even more why we need a plan, because we can see with this pandemic that when we don't have good planning, we get into worse jams. So a starting point that the reason we're looking at this right now is important for you to understand what the plan is based on. So TCAT had done an emissions inventory for our county before it was even decided that a plan would be created. And this pie chart here shows you the results of that. Now, this is the 2017 one because so far that's what they've been using. They will probably update it with our more current or recent information. And one thing that has changed since this pie chart was made is the transportation part includes emissions that are considered essentially to be coming from through traffic on I-5. And so they have adjusted to take that out because that's not really Thurston County's emissions. So you might wonder what is in some of these parts. So the built environment means all the emissions that happen inside of our buildings. So our homes, our business places, commercial, all of the buildings in Thurston County, the energy use that they're doing. This also includes energy that's used to build buildings. So, you know, where most of us consume energy is within that sector. Then transportation, as you can see, is a very large part of this.
Excuse me, Lynn.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. A couple of people are having trouble hearing you and wondering if you could speak closer to the mic.
Okay, I will. Is that better?
I see some nodding heads, yes.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, I'm glad somebody brought that to attention. So agriculture is very small for a couple reasons. One is we do not have a lot of farms inside of our county, and some of the farms we have are not really working farms, i.e. they're not producing for sale. They're more farms that people live on. And then the other thing is that we're still nationwide trying to figure out how to more accurately measure emissions from agriculture. And so this is represents what we can currently measure. And then waste, you see, is 3% of this. Now, some of you have probably seen national pie charts that have a lot more sectors on it. And so you may wonder, like, well, what's going on here? Some of that has to do with how you report things. So the building part, for example, in some pie charts is divided by residential and commercial, et cetera. And some pie charts will reflect things that are created in other places besides your county. So this gets us to what is scope 1 and what is scope 3. So scope 1 is emissions that are created inside of the county. And then scope 3 are emissions that are created by manufacturing or services outside of the county, essentially our consumer demand. And so for most of us, where a lot of our emissions really are in scope 3. But when you sit down to make a plan, the county can't really have agency over, you know, furniture that you got from somewhere else or the car that you got from somewhere else. It can only have agency over the kinds of emissions that we're creating while we're living in the county. So that's an important thing to understand when you look at this whole plan, because there will be things that you've heard people talking about in other places as important sources of greenhouse gases in our overall picture, and you won't see them in the plan. And it's not to say that they're not important, they are important, but we can only make a plan that deals with the things we have control over. So a disclaimer, this is not the plan. So this is the material, as I said, that has been consistently on the various lists that have been generated. So this is stuff that we think is, very, very, very likely to be in the plan, but the plan is not finished yet. And so this is a good point in time for you to know about what's likely to be in the plan, because it's not too late to influence the process. So if you have a strong feeling and you really feel like, oh, something should be in there, it's not too late to try to get to create some influence for that. And if you are just totally jazzed and excited about what you're hearing, then it's also an important time to keep pushing to make sure this actually gets passed and that it actually gets implemented by our cities. So that slide is out of place. Sorry. I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and I'm going to ask Chris to start sharing because he is going to tell you about the buildings part. And Chris, you got to unmute. Okay, Chris will be with us in 1 second after he gets himself unmuted.
Am I muted now or not?
No, now you're good.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm good. Okay, so you can hear me.
Yep.
Doing the sound check. Okay, we're good. All right. One more time then. I'm Chris Van Dalen, and I work for the Northwest Eco Building Guild. I do a lot of advocacy on green building policy. We've done a lot of education over the years. The Southtown Green Tour, which you may have attended at times, not happening this year. But I've been active on the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan Community Advisory Group, which Lynn described, and helped to put a lot of the items on the list, which I'm going to show right now. Lynn talked about option B and option A, and this is the list of all the different ideas that came up under the buildings and energy section, and it's broken down by different specific strategies, including reducing energy use in residential buildings, commercial buildings. It looks at both new and existing construction, but you can see here, so, a property tax credit for residential buildings, a baseline of energy efficiency requirements for rental housing, LED lighting in public sector buildings, energy project grants. Let's see, a couple of other ones here. Energy education, provide educational resources and technical assistance to industry professionals, building owners, and managers. So teaching people about energy. Green building tracking, having a monitoring system. So this gives you a sense of the kinds of actions that are on the list under buildings and energy. And I'm going to jump down here so you can see that there's also actions for, I passed it. For solar, increase the production of local renewable energy and convert to cleaner fuel sources. So there's these different strategies, and it's broken down by these individual items, which are then scored and ranked like Lynn described. So I'm going to share a different screen now. Go to this. So yeah, now I want to go to the presentation mode. Okay. So throughout this process, since we started working on the climate mitigation plan, I've been collaborating with TCAT, and we actually decided to form, TCAT has this structure, community organizing structure of having action groups that focus on specific areas. And of course, the Eco Building Guild is focused on a particular area. So we kind of put those two together. Both of our organizations members are participating in our Buildings as Climate Action group, or the BACA team, as we like to call ourselves. Anyway, so that's who we are. And now I got to figure out how to advance the slide. Here we go. Go forward. There we go. So I was just showing you the full list, but as I mentioned, it has several major strategies under the buildings and energy section. So reducing energy use across all building types, new, both residential and commercial buildings, as well as existing residential and commercial buildings. Increasing the local production of renewable energy and electrification. I'm going to go into more detail on a couple of these right now. So I'm going to highlight 4 of the actions that are highly ranked under the current scoring and are on option B, the list that we were just looking at, except for one, which is sort of in place still. So we'll come to that. But the 4 I'm going to touch on are rental housing, energy efficiency, electric appliances and new construction, which is code for natural gas, shifting from natural gas to electrification. Incentives for new buildings or retrofits that meet a certain energy standard. And then finally, number 4, exemplary buildings, which is a demonstration of highly energy efficient and zero carbon buildings and building projects. So those are the 4 I'm going to highlight here. Start with rental housing. Oh, but it just goes so crazy when you try to, okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So B1.6 in the plan is for rental housing energy efficiency. And it says to require rental units to meet baseline levels of energy efficiency and become more stringent over time. Now, to put this into context, rental units are about 50% of the homes in Thurston County are rentals, are occupied by renters. And the thing is that 70% of the building stock that we will have in 2050, when we're supposed to get to zero on our carbon emissions, 70% of those buildings exist today. So we have to focus, for this plan to be effective, we have to focus on existing buildings. And of course, rental units are a key piece of that. And one of the things that we know is that the more vulnerable members of our community, low-income people of color, tend to live in rental homes. And so if we can it would be a good thing to try to retrofit as many of our rental homes as possible, because it would help some of the folks who need more healthy, energy efficient, lower energy bills, the folks that need that the most. So the question is, how do you do something like that? I mean, we can't just require everyone. Or can we just require everyone to upgrade their insulation and their windows, and just have to cover the cost of that? Not everyone could even afford that. So there's a variety of ways to do it, and you could require an energy audit at the time of sale, so that at least you would know the energy performance, and you could get an energy efficient loan to do retrofits at that point. Or you could require retrofits at the time of sale or rental and provide some low interest loans or something to help people get it done. Or we could go all the way and just pay for people to have their homes retrofitted if we had something like a Green New Deal. So that's, it's just one item in the list, but you can see how it's kind of complicated in the way that we would actually go about implementing it. So we have to think those things through and really look at where our control is. How can we control rental upgrades? So that's the one that I wanted to focus on. The next one is on electric appliances and new construction. And again, this is code for getting rid of natural gas in our buildings, because the law that was passed last year, that the Clean Energy Transformation Act, will actually eliminate most of our emissions from electricity use by 2045. So the only thing left will be, as far as our emissions portfolio from buildings, will be natural gas if we're still using it. So what can we do now to hasten the transition away from this fossil fuel to a safer, cleaner fuel And, you know, so there's a couple of items that were in the plan. This one, B6.2, is the one that still is in the top 50 ranking, although it's been proposed for removal in option A, from option A. But what isn't in the plan is another that didn't make the ranking. This B4.4 down here that said that it was an item to ban all natural gas hookups in new buildings. And that one actually ranked very highly in most of the early scoring rounds that we saw. But then for some reason it wasn't in the final plan. So we're hoping that it will get put back in there, at least so that jurisdictions will have that as an option, because there is some authority to do that at the local level. So that's, you know, so that's a big question mark, and it's a little bit controversial around natural gas, because of course we have a very strong utility that's you know, that sells us natural gas. They don't want to see natural gas go down, and of course the oil and gas industry are holding on as well as they can, although they're having some troubles these days. So we'll see what happens with that. Another big one is really, how do we get new buildings and retrofits of buildings going faster? And, you know, how can we get buildings that are so energy efficient that they only need a little bit of renewable energy to make them a zero carbon building? So you know, B4.4 and through 4.9 are a number of different items that all relate to these kind of incentives. And so I'm going to highlight them as a group. Because the real question is, what is the right package of incentives that we can use to motivate builders and developers to build zero carbon buildings? Another way to ask that question is, you know, is there a kind of building, like a zero carbon affordable building affordable housing building, that we would want to support builders to be able to build those more than the code minimum buildings that they're currently building? So there's a whole lot of different ways that this can be done, from expedited permitting, reduced parking requirements, density and height incentives. You could reduce permit fees or impact fees. There's a new law called CPACER. It's for property assessed clean energy financing, which it's a mouthful and it's hard to understand on first without explaining it a lot. But suffice it to say, it could be a major financial tool for helping building owners get their buildings up to a higher energy standard and or put solar on the building. A lot of other potential grants and tax credits that are out there. The whole combination of these has to be tailored to our local situation, and that's where you know, the rubber meets the road with the plan and exactly how each jurisdiction is going to approach this. But that's in the plan. And then I also wanted to mention that we have working with a group called Shift Zero that has this toolkit of financial incentives and other types of incentives that can help zero carbon buildings. And we're using that to educate and advocate here locally. And finally, how much time am I doing on time, Glenn? Am I over my 10 minutes yet?
Not yet, but getting close.
Okay, good. So one of the things that I actually recommended to be in the plan is this B3.4, which is called exemplary buildings, to create a zero energy building challenge by partnering with public, private, nonprofit, and faith-based organizations for rapid deployment and public awareness of high-profile zero carbon buildings or zero energy buildings. And so the idea here is that, you know, it's really hard to get the building industry behind a regulation that requires zero carbon buildings, but that day is coming. We know that the Energy Code is leading us there. So, but that's, you know, the Energy Code in 2031 will require really close to net zero energy. But what can we do to accelerate that? Because as we know, we're in an emergency here. If we can accelerate that, we would need to get people within the industry to adopt this type of building practices early. And so the Exemplary Buildings Challenge would be a high-profile kind of PR vehicle, but it would also be combined with a PR vehicle to support and recognize these high-profile demonstration projects. But it would also be combined with the incentives that we were talking about just a second ago to help motivate builders to get on board and build these buildings and then show them off so that other builders could learn, and we could move our whole market toward a high performance, zero, climate friendly, zero carbon built environment. And it would take a lot of partnerships to get that done, but and so with this one, you can see how a number of these different action items in the plan could actually work together and create some synergy if we approach it strategically. And that's what we're trying to do with the Buildings as Climate Action team, trying to figure out how we can launch an exemplary buildings challenge, call for at least 50 of these zero carbon buildings to be built by 2030, including commercial, multifamily, single family, both new construction and retrofits, and see if we can help move the whole market in the right direction so that we can get to these targets for carbon emission reductions from the built environment faster and try to meet those targets. So that's, I think, all I have for my presentation. And oh, yeah, there's a little bit more on what would be the challenge, what would be the criteria for the building challenge you can see there. I'll leave that up for a second while Lynn transitions us to the next speaker.
Do you still have your next slide that reminds people about the Buildings Act? There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, and I can announce that our next meeting for the Buildings as Climate Action Group will be Thursday, May 14th from 3:30 to 4:30 on a Zoom conference. We just decided that this afternoon. So again, that's next Thursday, a week from today, from 3:30 to 4:30, we'll be having our Zoom conference BACA team meeting. So we'll make sure that gets in the next newsletter.
And if that interests you, then you can email to Chris to kind of join up with that. Okay, yep. We are going to switch now from talking about buildings to talking about transportation. And there's one thing I forgot to mention when I was showing the pie chart. So originally when I was showing the pie chart, it showed that buildings was a much bigger share than transportation. However, Chris mentioned the Clean Energy Act. What is the name of it?
Clean Energy Transformation Act.
Thank you.
100% clean energy by 2045.
Right. So that passed in our state legislature, and that will change what the greenhouse gas emissions of buildings are considerably, because it will move our grid to being a clean grid. And so by doing that, we now expect transportation to be our biggest sector in the pie. Although both Karen and Carrie will be talking a little bit about how we intend to change that. So I'm going to switch to Karen now, who's going to tell you about transportation.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad to see so many people online here this evening, and I am going to share my screen here. Okay. Can you see my PowerPoint here now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, just a quick introduction, leaving this pie chart, which is slightly different, up here for a couple of minutes. I'm volunteering for TCAT these days. I'm retired from my 30-year career in energy efficiency and renewables. But while I was also working in energy, primarily in the buildings arena, but all sectors, I also have been an advocate for active transportation for the last 30 years as well, and been involved with among other things, the Planning Commission, City Council, and then Transit Authority Board. So I've had this sort of dual activity for quite a while now in terms of my involvement in the community. As you can see by this chart, which I pulled off of the Climate Action Plan website, passenger vehicles are a large portion of the transportation, 36%. Of our emissions in our region. So same amount that we're talking about, but the passenger vehicle piece is really the largest of those. And that's the area where local governments can probably have the most influence in terms of what they do with the community. In the transportation area, I'm going to cover some broad strategies and then some specific actions, but not necessarily all of the actions. Once again, it's a fairly long list. and realizing that even amongst the long list, this isn't quite going to get us there for our emissions at this point. So passenger vehicles really are the big problem at this point in our emissions. We can either eliminate the emissions from our vehicles with electrification, which Carrie is going to talk about more, or we need to reduce the number of miles traveled by cars. And since electrification of our cars is going to take a little while, in the meantime, we really need to reduce the emissions of our existing fleet that we have. So there's 4 strategy areas presented in the plan right now. One of those is land use. Another is active transportation. Another is transit. Oop, is that me? There we go. Another is transit, and we'll go into the detail on those. And there's one other called efficiency, transportation efficiency actions. And I'll just cover that very quickly towards the end. So in the land use area, there's a number of actions that are listed, including things like transit corridors. They call it middle density housing. I think that's really infill is what they mean. 20-minute neighborhoods, which I'll cover a little more in depth, putting employment near transit, and they describe that with some different terminology, and then focusing development in the urban area and not sprawling out into the urban area. Land use patterns really do drive our vehicle emissions. This is the kind of development that has been fairly traditional for quite some time, and getting back out of this tradition is not going to be easy. This is something that is going to be a real challenge because we've built our way into this, this problem where we rely on our cars for virtually all of our transportation. And it leaves us with some retrofit to do and with some difficult choices to make because where we live influences how far we need to go to shop, to go to school, to go to our services. Local jurisdictions have zoning authority, which means that over the long run, they can change and influence how our community is built and whether we need to use our car for our daily needs or how far we need to go. So there's something in the land use arena that's called a 20-minute neighborhood that is listed as an action in the plan. And this is a situation where you're looking at distance and density and destinations in combination to say, can you walk or cycle? Can you not take a car trip for most of your daily needs? So that would mean that we'd put our schools in neighborhoods. We would have services and commercial businesses near to neighborhoods, that the density of those neighborhoods would provide enough business for some of those services and businesses that they would have a going concern. So you can walk to get a haircut. So this combination of a 20-minute neighborhood also works well for serving with transit because the frequency and the convenience of transit can serve that high level of density. A transit system needs about 10 to 12 units per acre to really be fairly efficient. So this is a grouping of activities that are included in the land use category. They don't call it distance, density, and destinations. They call it 20-minute neighborhoods, I believe. Another areas of strategy in the plan is called active transportation, having people be able to use walking and cycling more. This means having more sidewalks, safe crossings, safe cycling lanes, trails, and connecting the routes so that it's quick and easy to get somewhere. Walking and cycling infrastructure, it means that it's a smooth ride, it's a safe ride. You have access to being able to cross the street safely, for example. There's also programs that really encourage and support kids walking and cycling to school, and I think that's getting them early, teaching them has been really successful in our region. So those are also included in the plan. A couple of examples of infrastructure include the 4th Avenue Bridge area, where you'll see wide sidewalks, good cycling support, safe crossings at the roundabouts. That gives people encouragement to use that kind of transportation. Connectivity is another important aspect of walking and cycling. You might have experienced where you walk in a neighborhood and it's called a dead worm, I'll call it, where you can't really get to somewhere and you can see there's a fence and you can't quite get to the grocery store. So these are really important elements of the active transportation parts of this plan. There's another strategy area called increasing the use of public transit. And there's some elements of this I want to go into just a little more. One of the actions is to educate and promote for transit. And of course, we want more people to use transit. We need to focus the transit, however, where it will serve to reduce emissions. One of the items that's in action is listed as a fareless system, which of course has been recently announced. So I think, you know, we could check that one off of our list. The part I want to talk about is the need to focus transit where it will actually reduce emissions. Our current transit system operates in a fairly wide area, and some of our buses don't run very full. With 5.3 miles per gallon, which is what they're getting with their coaches, if they ran with 10 people on board for most of the day, for most of their daily trips on those routes, we would have, even across the board, perhaps reducing emissions from people driving a hybrid vehicle. So we need to have our transit system operating in a more full and efficient fashion to really reduce emissions. Honestly, it worries me that we might think that just having buses running around will actually reduce emissions, because it won't if they're diesel buses at this point. So that's a little bit of a caution on this, is that we need the dense development, we need high ridership in order to really have the system causing a reduction in emissions. Now,
could you repeat how many people actually need it be on a bus for it to, you know, be better than them being in cars?
You'd need to have the bus running with 10 people or more. That's just my rough calculation, on board all the time, in order to make those trips lower emission than 1 or 2 people in a hybrid vehicle, 2 people in a standard vehicle, and probably just 1 in a hybrid. So it's just a little bit of a brain twister, I think. I think when we see the buses driving around, we think, oh great, transit's good, but it's good as a social service program. Honestly, we need people to get to their jobs. And if they can't afford a car, we should provide some transit. But we need to make sure that we also caveat our transit focus to make sure that it is reducing emissions. Now, we're going to throw in Carrie's topic here just momentarily to say that if we electrify the transit system, which is technically feasible, that totally changes the dynamics of how it operates and how many emissions come from that system. So one other note about transit and land use is that some of the benefits of the density in the urban area tend to bring that the housing affordability in very dense areas goes down. People have a harder time finding an affordable place to live. But the reality is, if you live near transit, or you can walk, or you can cycle, and you don't need to own a car, your household budget is actually lower for your transportation. So there's some co-benefits there to having density if you can put affordable housing on transit routes and mix all that together. There's one other item in the action group. Well, there's our picture of our bus. There's another couple of actions here, one of them under the category of transportation efficiency, and that is supporting telework and flex schedules and telework infrastructure. And of course, at this moment, here we are working from our homes. Many of you are working from your homes. And I think this one will start to take on a different flavor in our almost immediate future of reducing vehicle emissions, because people are going to discover that they can telework, and perhaps we'll see an uptick in that more quickly than we would have imagined. I guess to wrap up on this transportation one, the more you think about the interrelationships between the transit, the walkability, the bikeability, the land use, those are all very integral to each other. If you can walk to the transit bus and take a transit bus and then walk to your haircut after work, you may not use a car as much, but that you need to have a neighborhood that's been designed and built in a way that supports that. So they're very connected. It's a very connected system, and this has been something I've been fascinated about for a long, long time, and I find it really interesting. I think this plan has some elements that sort of wake up our awareness to this, and I'm hoping that the local governments will pay more attention to some of these things now that they know how important it is for climate mitigation. So I'm open to questions.
And we're not done with everybody's presentations, but if you have
Okay.
transportation questions, right now would be the time.
What about airplanes?
Remember again that we said we can only put in the plan emissions that are generated inside of Thurston County. So
Right.
you know, although all of us are taking plane trips and that is contributing to the problem, well, many of us are, that is not an emissions inside of Thurston County.
I understand that. The thing is, the decision to make an airplane flight comes from Thurston County.
That's true. So we need to be responsible. Do other people have questions for Karen? Okay, well, since she has stopped sharing.
Oh, I see there's a question in the chat box. We know the percentage of IT routes that currently operate with an average of 10 people on board? I would say less than half. There are certain routes, the Evergreen route, there's during some parts of the day, there's certainly some peak time on some routes that they're operating with 10 or more people on board. But certainly the route that goes out to Yelm for most of the miles is not operating with 10. They may be bringing 10 people in at times. So there's a number of routes, and that information is available on the IT website. I saw that it was 2018 was the latest that was available. They did have an uptick in ridership when the fare-free system went into place, and then of course everything crashed and they're not even operating their scheduled routes right now. So, you know, we'll have to see what happens when all of this all of this pandemic is over.
Okay.
Possible other question?
Okay, one more question, then we're going to go to Carrie.
Okay, thanks. This is Cleve, Karen. Thanks so much for the presentation. I was interested listening to Chris's presentation about buildings and pointing out that so much of what we'll be dealing with are buildings that are already in place. So when I think about your presentation with those 20-minute neighborhoods, we've got a lot of infrastructure in place. Do we need a strategy that thinks about how we essentially retrofit existing neighborhoods to come closer to that model that you're describing?
That's a great comment, Clay. Really, we are, it's going to be a difficult process. And frankly, you've seen in Olympia, there's been quite an uproar about the thing called the missing middle, which I'm not going to say one way or the other about how or to what extent that, you know, should or shouldn't happen. But some of the concern is putting density closer in and trying to do infill, for example. I think personally, I think that the corridors that we have on the major thoroughfares, Martin Way, Capitol, Harrison, those getting some focus and some development along those would be very helpful.
Karen, you broke up completely. You're going to have to start.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you're going to have to run the last two sentences again.
Okay, hang on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. This is a very difficult issue because, as you point out, we're already built, we have built ourselves into the problem in some ways. But I think we can focus on our corridors, for example, and we can put services and activities and intensity on those corridors, and that might be a way to start or to get people comfortable. And for some neighborhoods, their 20-minute neighborhood is to go to the corridor and get on the bus, or to go to the corridor to have their services. And those corridors go through a lot of neighborhoods. So I think that might be one of the strategies they could use here to get things going with a little more intensity of uses.
Okay, I do see that some other people have questions. However, because we are, each of us has spoken a little overtime, I want to get through Carrie's part and then the closing comments and then go back to questions so that anybody who's really time pressed can leave at the end of the formal part of the presentation, and then, you know, we'll do the questions, and we're hoping for some discussion too about, you know, how you all are feeling about this. So I'm going to go to Carrie, and this slide that is up is for her part on electric vehicles.
Great, thank you, Lynn. Can folks hear me all right? Yep, excellent. All right, well, great presentations, Karen and Chris. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about electrical vehicles, EVs, and we'll move on to questions. So I did think, especially considering the slide that Karen showed, showing the percentage that passenger vehicles play in our emissions, it is important to talk more about electric vehicles, especially since it's one of the biggest actions that us as individuals can take. So we'll just spend a few minutes about that, talking about that. So I know for me, like, buying a new car is not a small task, and there's a lot of barriers that can come up to buying an electric vehicle. And so those are both perceived and real. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about EVs from that perspective and look at the items in the plan from the perspective of how they can help us to break down those barriers. So the first one I wanted to touch on is what's called range anxiety. So that's this idea of, you know, we get worried. How far can I drive? Am I going to be able to charge up my vehicle? Will I get home again? And there's a couple of different items that address this specifically. So one of them is EV ready building code. And I know this slide is very hard to see, so we can get you the information otherwise too if you want to look a little closer at this. I didn't put together a fancy PowerPoint, so you'll have to bear with us here. But so the EV ready building code is for new construction to come equipped, residential construction to come equipped already with charging ability for EVs. And this also allows for a much easier permitting system to retrofit an existing residential building. There's also an item to require larger new construction for commercial and residential buildings to dedicate a certain number of parking spaces to electric vehicle charging. And another item that is all about integration of EVs and just really breaking down those barriers for places to put up charging stations so that we can have charging stations throughout the community, particularly in our homes and at work. Because if we can, you know, aside from the long distance car ride, going to the store and back and going to work and back are the main trips that we take. And so that's going to really help to break down that barrier of like, how can I get where I need to go? Another barrier, perceived and real to some, is the cost, right, of electric vehicles. And I don't know about you, but I hear a lot about Teslas, right? And Teslas are like so expensive. My husband's all like, let's get a Tesla. I'm like, we cannot get a Tesla right now, but maybe someday, I don't know. But there are a lot of other EVs out there that are a lot more affordable and more comparable to standard gas vehicles and prices. But one of the items on the plan that I'd like to just touch on is the EV mass purchase discounts. Now, this is an idea where you can create a big purchase discount purchase program for residents to get really deep discounts on EVs and other alternative fuel vehicles. For instance, in Seattle a while back, there was a group of people, about 200 people, who got together and they were able to buy Nissan Leafs and get $10,000 off the sticker price. So this kind of deep discount can really help to allow us to get a little, you know, get the kind of vehicle that we really want. There were some folks who tried this in Thurston County a few years ago, but they weren't able to get it kicked off because they didn't have the local government support to make that happen. And so because this is in the plan, once it gets passed and implemented, that government support should be much more available. And I think we'll really be able to get this type of thing going in Thurston County. There's another item on the plan that talks about creating purchase incentives. And I don't know a great deal about what those specifically would be, but they'd be targeting particularly Thurston County residents to help them get electric vehicles. And of course, around and through all of this is EV education, which that is number 5 on this plan as far as the importance of being able to do this, is getting more education out there to the consumer. Because two of the major barriers are driver and dealer understanding of electric vehicles. We just don't understand them like we understand gas vehicles. And it's true also that when people go into dealerships, it's pretty common that they may be going there to look at EVs and they'll be steered towards gas vehicles instead. So getting the education up like we're doing with TCAT and through other organizations is really an important factor in helping us to transition away from gas vehicles into more electric vehicles and alternative fuel vehicles. Now, I'm not an expert on EVs, but I am learning a lot. And for me, you know, I've thought about purchasing an EV before, and I never felt like I've had the money, or at least not to get the money and to get like the kind of car that was actually going to be worth anything. But in my recent research, especially talking to people who know about EVs so much, I'm starting to feel like I can really actually at some point make this purchase. And so I think it's pretty exciting to begin to realize like how beneficial it can be to drive an EV and to just learn so much more about them. And so just in closing, one of my tasks with TCAT is to kick off a new transportation action group. And this group will be involved in lobbying for the climate mitigation, for the climate mitigation plan and making sure it gets implemented, and also doing public education. And so if you are at all interested in joining this group, we plan on having the first meeting later this month, and I'd absolutely love for you to join it. This would be a great time to get involved and actually help to steer the direction of the group, and we can, you know, decide what exactly we want to focus on and what you want to do going for there. But I'm sure at least part of that will be a focus on electric vehicles, because I think this is a place where we can make a big difference in our community. So, thanks. Lynn, you're muted if you're trying to say something.
Thank you. I was saying thank you, Carrie, and if you're interested in joining the action group that will be focusing on transportation and EVs, then just email Carrie at Thurston Climate Action. Okay, so trees and agriculture. So you will recall that I said at the beginning that there was a focus group on trees and agriculture. Now, agriculture showed up as 1% in our pie chart. And one of the things that's been a little bit challenging around how trees and agriculture get represented into our plan is they are primarily sequesterers. They're not emitters. There is some emissions from agriculture, especially if you do it the wrong way. But for the most part, they're sequesterers. And really, because our plan is based on a greenhouse gas inventory and bringing down the emissions, there was sort of a tension that got recognized by the two committees as they were working through this about how to represent things that sequester into the plan. And on a nationwide basis, they're still trying to figure out, really how to do measurements around sequestration. So that puts some kind of questions over the whole thing. One item, which is kind of midway down this list here, reforestation and afforestation, has kind of made it onto every list. What is ironic about that is if you know about trees, you know that it's actually the big trees that sequester the most amount of carbon. New trees, little trees, take many years to grow into being big sequesterers. So in terms of what's actually more effective for sequestration, it would be the item down at the bottom, a 6.9 tree canopy preservation. But because of our scoring system, which scored the things that could not require legislation to go into effect, it doesn't require legislation for the cities to decide to plant more trees, whereas passing an ordinance which will be more protective of the older trees, that does require the cities to adjust their ordinances. So the one thing from the both tree and agriculture category that has been consistently in the plan, or in the plan of the plan, is the reforestation and afforestation one. In what just passed in April, they have now included all of the items that you see here. So the one about tree canopy preservation did get included. And then there's this middle item here, municipal canopy. And that basically says that the cities have control over city trees and that they could do some things to preserve and increase the city trees as well. And then managing of forests up there as well. So regenerative agriculture is an idea that TCAT has had a number of educational programs about and has been promoting, because nationally we know that agriculture is a really big part of our carbon footprint, and when agriculture is done with a lot of fertilizer and with a lot of pesticides, and there are also manure issues. Those three things create a bad carbon footprint for agriculture, whereas regenerative agriculture nourishes the soil in a way where it actually draws down carbon into the soil. So we were promoting that get in the plan, and at this point it looks like it will be in there. And the Conservation District is starting to work on trying to educate farmers about this. And a bill that just recently passed in our last session of the Washington legislature is also trying to support the conservation districts around the state to go a little bit more in this direction. The nutrient management one is actually something I personally wish would be removed because I think it goes in the opposite direction. It's working on trying to help people reduce the footprint of fertilizer, and I think actually the best way to reduce the footprint of fertilizer would be to do regenerative agriculture, but that is currently in there. If you are interested in more on either of these two things, TCAT's Tree Action Group is working on tree ordinances to protect more trees and also tree planting events. And as it turns out right now, all 4 of our jurisdictions are in the process of reviewing their tree ordinances, and we hope improving them. And so we're trying to, that will work with the action item that's in the plan. And then our agriculture and food group is holding a webinar next Wednesday on how the food production methods that are best for the earth are also the ones that are best for your health. So if you want more on either of those things, you can email me to find out more about those 2 things. So the last thing we're going to talk about is cross-cutting. That was the 5th focus area within the advisory committee. And I have listed here the items from cross-cutting that are currently looking like they will be in the plan. So one is for the jurisdictions to use their own lobbyists, lobby the legislature for things that will support this plan. And all of us mentioned at certain points things that have passed or are about to pass that are critical to this plan. And so it's important that the jurisdictions represent that to the legislature. We have to keep updating the emissions inventory. That was that pie chart I showed you at the beginning, and it changes every year. And for this plan to be effective, we have to really keep track of that. And then expanding the emissions inventory to include sequestration. So we're trying to, as I said, figure out how to do that. Social research and behavior change. So really being able to get a good pulse on how to help people make changes. Addressing the needs of vulnerable populations. We want to make sure as this plan goes forward that it helps vulnerable populations and doesn't hurt them. And then adopting policies that will require measurement of greenhouse gases for everything we do. So what that would mean is like each of the city departments, as they're making decisions, all of the kinds of things they have to make decisions about all the time, that they be required to kind of think about what are the climate implications, what are the emissions implications of this decision versus that decision. And there are cities who have passed things like that, and it does really make a difference in sort of how the general policy goes. So, so you might be wondering, how could you be more involved in advocating for the passage of a strong climate mitigation plan? So one of our action groups is called Carbon Free Thurston, and that group is the group that advocates for this plan. So if you contact Tom, you could join that group, and that group meets on the 3rd week of each month. And then we also have the amazing Chrysalis project, which Carrie is working on. And you want to unmute for a minute, Carrie, and just say something about that?
Yeah, sure. So we developed a new art in action project called the Chrysalis Project Transforming Together. And this online workshop really talks about some of the relationships between the pandemic and what we might experience with climate change, and then looks at the life cycle of a butterfly as a metaphor for where we're at as a society. And in that workshop, everybody is writing a letter to local officials, asking for them to take strong climate action and making commitments themselves, and also drawing and creating their own vision for what the future they want to see in the future in the motif of a butterfly. And those are on the back side of these letters that are being sent out. So I have a few workshops coming up, and I did one a couple weeks ago, and it was very powerful. So looking forward to doing more.
Thank you. Okay, and one other thing you can do is sign our pledge card and petitions. You can find those on our website. And we're especially looking for people who will, quote unquote, carry petitions. Well, we can't do that the old-fashioned way and stand in front of the grocery store or anything. So what you can do is email your friends who live in Thurston County and draw this to their attention and get them to sign the petition too. Because we want, whether it's butterflies or petitions or letters, we really want communication going to our council people to let them know that we want a strong mitigation plan. And some of you may be asking, well, okay, that's what the city's going to do, and there's a lot of policies, etc. But like, what about me? Like, what if I want to reduce my greenhouse emissions? So I have put here in rank order what are the most important things you can do as an individual. The first one is to stop or reduce flying. And I know that's painful if you have family who live elsewhere, etc. But some of us have discovered during this pandemic that flying to a conference really isn't necessary, that they can be done online. You can get into an EV car, as Carrie was talking about. You can stop or reduce eating meat. If you're not getting an EV, at least get a hybrid. You can bring your home up to the highest energy efficiency possible, which Chris was talking about. And, get yourself off of gas, please, if you can. All kinds of things like insulation, efficient appliances, etc. And then use efficient home heating to begin with. And lastly, reducing your garbage from 90 gallons a week to 60 has, you wouldn't believe, a really significant impact. So those are things you could do individually. And I'm gonna take this down, and we're gonna open up now for questions and discussion and everything. And if there's anybody who's like really gotta go somewhere, this would be your time to exit. But I'm excited to see what kind of questions we have. You can either raise your hand so we can see it, or some of you know how to use the raise hand function on Zoom, and so that's another way you can do it. Okay, I know earlier, I don't know if he's still here, Kirk had a question.
Rose Kellogg, I think, would like to say something.
Okay, and then maybe after that, Kirk. Go ahead, Rose.
So maybe this is, well, two things actually come to mind. Maybe this is a really quick answer for the first one. Why is it so important to get off gas? Because so much of our energy is still being supplied by coal. That's one. And the other one is a question of, is there any working with Puget Sound Energy to get a program going where the time of use of your energy, like if you plug in your electric vehicle overnight, that you get a better price on your energy delivery?
I'm going to take a stab at the first one, and I'm hoping Chris might know the answer to the second one. So the reason we're trying to get people to switch from gas to electric, when you're quite right that right now electric is still fossil fuels, is because under the law that was passed last year, PSE is mandated to get off of fossil fuels. And so eventually, by switching, as we switch to electric, eventually the electric grid will become clean. And so since there are there's some time involved in making those kinds of changes, we're trying to get people to make the changes in anticipation of the fact that that will happen. Do you want to take a stab at the other one?
Well, I think I want to clarify a little bit your answer there. I mean, the law that Lynn's referring to, the Clean Electricity Transformation Act, only applies to the electric grid. It doesn't say that we have to end use of fossil fuels for home heating, and that's not included in the bill. And so once that bill takes effect, although 2045, that's 25 years from now. So our buildings right now are the biggest polluters in our portfolio, and so if we wait 25 years to eliminate that or to get a clean electricity grid, so we have to do both. We have to do the making our homes more energy efficient, making new buildings more energy efficient and renewable energy on both new and existing. And we have to try to switch off natural gas, because eventually that's going to be the only thing left from our homes that's polluting the climate. Now, the other question, I think, I'm not sure I heard it clearly enough, because I wasn't thinking about electric vehicle charging at the time. Well, could you repeat it? You're asking about the peak loads? Or?
Is there any is there any initiative to work with Puget Sound Energy to get them to give people a discount for using energy, like running their laundry overnight or charging their car overnight, and so that we don't have such high peaks?
That's a good question. I really don't have an answer. Does anyone on the call have more knowledge of utilities? David?
Can
Anyone?
folks hear me?
You have to, I think David Gogg's going to speak in. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Karen.
Well, PSE did try a little pilot of that program, but the price differential wasn't big enough, and so they didn't do very well with it. But other utilities have tried those programs, and there needs to be quite a big gap between the price in order to get residential customers to participate. It's a fairly sophisticated thing to ask consumers to do, honestly. But as we move to electric charging vehicles, I think there'll be more and more demand for that kind of pricing, so that you can charge your electric vehicle overnight for cheaper, for example. But certainly, talking to PSE or the Utilities and Transportation Commission about this would indicate that you're interested in that kind of pricing.
Okay, I'm going to call on Kirk Hafner.
Oh, thank you. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I was really curious about the transportation discussion, and I really appreciate it. I think, Karen, you mentioned the 20-minute neighborhood. And I would just like to remind people about old concepts called the 100-mile diet. And also, I'm trying to work towards a 100-mile economy. We buy solar panels, for example, that are made in either Bellingham primarily or Hillsboro, Oregon, not across the US or especially from Asia. And that's just an example. I also mentioned about transportation in schools. We see a lot of congestion in our neighborhood because parents insist on driving their kids to school as opposed to using the bus transportation. And in some countries, it's either you walk, bike, or ride public transportation. And I think that would be really cool. And the last one, just a quick comment, is I've always had a thing about drive-throughs. And now with the COVID-19 crisis, of course, drive-throughs have been our savior. But when you see a whole line of cars, 20 cars long, sitting there and idling and spewing emissions, David, you're laughing. I could see you on that. It's like, we got to rethink those things as well. So I just wanted to offer those thoughts in relation to the discussion that's been happening. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirk.
Kirk, I just want to add to your comment about the school transportation. School boards are also local governments, and they are people that you can influence by contacting them. And I know right now that the North Thurston School District is very interested in reducing their transportation budget for busing because it costs them a lot of money. So they are very actively working on walk and ride to school programs for their students and trying to find ways for them to have safe walking routes. And so I'm very encouraged by that. And in Olympia, a lot of the schools are within walking distance of where the students live. But I agree, there's a real cultural question here about parents taking their children to school, and some of these walk and roll programs really try to change that a little bit and get the parents involved and show them how it's very healthy for their children to walk to school.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, it doesn't affect congestion at all, but just so in case people didn't know, that the North Thurston and Olympia school districts just got grant money from the Department of Ecology to purchase up to 6 electric buses.
Yeah.
So we'll see how those work out for the school districts.
Okay, I'm going to take some more questions, and I'm also going to call out that Tom Crawford is here with us, and so I'm going to give Tom a minute to think about whether he has anything that we didn't cover that he wants to throw in. But in the meantime, I'm going to take a question from Phyllis, who had her hand up.
As a former teacher, I can say a lot of parents drive their kids to school because their kids report being bullied on school buses. So the solution to that is cameras in all of the school buses and or adult aides, para-educators on those buses. So when I first started at Camachin in '92, almost every kid walked or was bused. And by the time I retired, that parking lot was clear out onto College Street with hundreds of cars coming in to pick their kids up. So, and the common theme was safety for their kids on buses. So the school board that people can influence can help address that problem. When there are cameras in every bus, that reduces, because the poor bus drivers can't do it.
Okay, I cannot tell Joe whether you have your hand up. Are you having your hand up or not? You'll have to unmute if you're trying to say something because I can't hear you.
No, I'm just holding up my glasses, that's all.
Okay, okay, all right.
I have real small bifocals, so I have to hold them up in order to see the screen.
Okay, cool. All right, just couldn't tell. Those of you who have your cameras turned off, I have no way of knowing if you're raising your hand, so you'd have to turn your camera on in order to indicate to me that you have a question.
I do have a question, as a matter of
You
fact.
have a question. Okay,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Regarding the assignments that you gave us, as far as letters to the county commissioners and the city councils, does this meeting change any of that?
No. So what Joe's talking about, for those of you who don't know, is you know, we've had a project of trying to write to the council people, and we focused on different parts of the plan to let them know what we're excited about in the plan. So we wrote for a month about buildings, we wrote about transportation, we wrote about energy. So if you want to help try to get this plan to pass, please write me and you can join that group to help get the plan passed.
If there aren't any more questions right this second, I wanted to come back to Rose's question about natural gas, and because there's one thing I had meant to say about that I think is really important, is that natural gas is not the clean fuel that a lot of people think it is. It has a lot of kind of invisible impacts, both inside of our homes. Natural gas stoves produce a lot more particulate matter and maybe seriously compromising our air quality. They're also obviously it's an explosive element that you're basically having explosive materials in your home. So we've seen places where homes and whole neighborhoods have gone up in flames from natural gas. So there's real safety and health issues that are concerned with natural gas. And then you also have to consider the impact on the people who live in communities involved with the production, the distribution, and transportation of fossil fuels. There's a lot of impact on those local communities and all the communities along the transportation routes that are concerned with natural gas. So just a few more things of reasons to maybe try to move away from it that aren't necessarily climate related, but if we look at it all together, there's a lot of reasons to try to do it.
I'm just gonna read a couple things from our chat box here. We have Commissioner Mensner on the line, and he mentions that he's received many of those letters that I was just referencing and said thank you for them. And Pat has commented that another thing people can do personally is buy local food, that the average food item travels 1,500 miles to your table from field. So that's another thing that you can do. And someone else is pointing out that the Olympian has an opinion page tomorrow about the mitigation plan. I'm not seeing hands. I will also invite people. Oh, yes, there's Brock. Brock has got his hand up. You want to unmute Brock?
He's in San Francisco.
I'd like to tag on to what Chris said, because I think it's a really important point that that natural gas, which I prefer to call fracked gas because most of it is fracked, is very harmful in two other ways. One is that it's between 25 and 85% more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, depending on how long it's been in the atmosphere. And so that's a huge problem. And then another thing is that there's enormous leakages in the pipelines and in blowouts in wells. For example, a well in eastern Ohio was found to put out as much methane I think in a single day as all of Europe in a year. It was really unbelievable how much. And the Four Corners area in our country is putting out, it's just got hundreds of these wells. So anyway, it's definitely not a bridge fuel.
Thanks, Brock.
I have a question here from Commissioner Menzner to Karen particularly. He wrote that one commissioner is arguing that more telework will cause people to move to rural country and undermine all the land use principles you describe. Do you agree?
No. Well, I'm not necessarily advocating that everyone should telework. Obviously, there are jobs, and we're experiencing it now, where people can't work remotely. Telework could be something someone does a couple of days a week. They could do it almost full time. If you look at the sprawl that we're having in the rural area, though, I don't think we can limit the reasons people will choose to want to live in the rural areas. I think the leadership we need is for the sensitive areas, the ag land, the forests, and so forth to be preserved. And when you preserve all that out in the rural areas and areas with not enough water and areas with high water table, it goes on and on. By the time we're done with that, there may not be room in the rural areas for people to actually sprawl out there, and there probably shouldn't be. So that's a different angle on it than to say, well, let's not do telework because people might choose to live further from work. They're living a long ways from work right now because they're driving to Tacoma for their job, even if they live in the urban area or the rural area. So I don't see that. That's a red herring, in my opinion, that to say that telework is going to cause sprawl. We should limit sprawl for any reason.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I also wanted to open up a little bit for comments. Like, I'd love to hear from people, either what you found exciting in the plan that you heard about, or if you have a concern that you want to raise about what you heard. Well, that got everyone's tongue. Okay, well, looks like we might be gonna wrap up. I'm gonna do a last minute check here. So if you've got something to say, please raise your hand. And if your camera is turned off so I can't see you, then just unmute and speak. Okay, Carolyn, you wanna unmute?
I just want to say thanks to all who've been involved with getting the climate mitigation plan rolling and keeping it going. I've been part of that carbon-free Thurston group for 2 or 3 years. I don't know how long, maybe longer, maybe shorter. And so much has happened. I mean, just listening to this list, you have no idea of how much went into creating the lists that are now extant. So I just give a shout out to all the people who worked really hard on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. I would especially appreciate Tom Crawford in that category, because I don't think we'd be anywhere where we are if it weren't for Tom.
Yes, here, here.
Tom.
Well, I'm going to try to recover the best I can from my embarrassment here. But no, thank you very much. I also want to encourage people to consider the impact that you can have by simply writing a letter or writing an email. I have personally seen it have a really significant impact on our local elected officials. And I think we got a huge opportunity, partly because of the size of our community. We're at a size where it's quite, well, when we were out shopping, it's quite likely that we would see one or more of these elected officials on the street or in the grocery store. And so they know that they're part of the community. They know who we are, we know who they are. And so when we write a letter or we write an email or we send a drawing or I saw some amazingly beautiful pieces of artwork in the Chrysalis Project session that we participated in. And so they know that these are their neighbors, you know, and so they pay attention. They pay very close attention to the kinds of letters and cards and messages that they get in the mail. And also the fact is they don't get, you know, sometimes that many letters or cards or people showing up to city council meetings. So we have a tremendous opportunity to make a huge impact here and to provide an example for how our size of community can actually make things like this work. So just encourage you, you know, go to our website for the pledge card, for the petition. We'd love to have you at our next Carbon Free Thurston meeting, which will be on May 20th. And just stay with it and keep in touch and keep doing the wonderful work that I know you're all doing. Thanks.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on than that one. So you can unmute and say goodbye if you want, but in about 3 seconds here, I'm gonna terminate the whole thing. And I wanna thank our panel again. Thanks to Chris, Karen, and Carrie. Yeah.
Thank you. Good job.
Everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Great
job, Lynn. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lynn.
Yep.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Lynn. Good to see you, Carrie and Barb and Carolyn.
Anytime.